Hey biology, this is Mr. Hausman. We're going to do a one-day introduction to a chemical reaction that happens in all living organisms that is called cellular respiration. And maybe the word respiration has some meaning to you before you start. Respiring is sometimes a word that means breathing, but that word usually means it relates to like a whole organism. What's the respiration rate of the patient? How many times a minute do they breathe? So that's not the use we're using here. We're talking about cellular respiration at the level of cells. And so there is a connection. The key idea here is that the cells are using, glucose, which is of course a sugar. It's the most common way that that animals get energy, and they're converting it into a lot of ATP. Maybe you remember in photosynthesis, a small amount of ATP is made in the first step of photosynthesis called the light reaction. But now what we're going to get is basically a return on our food. This food is stored chemical energy. You then combine it with oxygen, and you produce a ton of ATP. The chemical byproducts, or the products, are the carbon dioxide and some water. Now, if you're really good and notice, wait a minute, plants make glucose and plants make O2, or that is to say anyone who does photosynthesis. And now those same chemicals that were parts of the products, they're now the reactants. And if you're really carefully notice that the CO2 and water that were the reactants are now the products. So we would say that cellular respiration is the opposite. The reactants and the products switch places between photosynthesis and cell respiration. Okay, so let's do a little geography. Where is this happening? Well, in a eukaryotic cell, there's these special organelles that we've all heard of called the mitochondria. And the mitochondria have an outer membrane and they have an inner membrane system. And the inner membrane is highly folded up. And as it turns out, we of course call these guys the powerhouse of the cell. That's an overused, maybe lesser understood nickname for the mitochondria. But the powerhouse, the reason why we call it that is because it is making most of this ATP. So mitochondria are where the cellular respiration mostly happens. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Oh, by the way, quick prompt. You should have out your cellular respiration one-page note sheet, and we'll be using it in just a minute. It's actually in this video. Okay. So this is a video. It's on YouTube. It's called Cellular Respiration. You could kind of find it by the name of the file if you want to watch it separately. I did have some trouble with playing back this file inside a video. It's kind of like a video inside a video. But if we go ahead and kind of start this or kind of move through it, let me use the right button. Here we go. Okay. Oh, there's a quick ad that's probably getting in the way.
I use Zatarain's yellow rice to put a New Orleans twist on the food I grew up eating.
And I'm not sure you're going to be able to hear the audio. It's a little complicated. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go through this video with a brief introduction. So here's the pre-roll. Okay, it's a video series from a YouTube channel called Teacher's Pet, and this is a really short version. If you Google or go to YouTube and look up cellular respiration, you're going to find everything from 5-minute videos, 2-minute, all the way up to 20 minutes of people introducing this chemical reaction. And the reason why is because depending on the depth of knowledge you want to explore, it's super complicated. It's really intense, okay? So it all starts with glucose. Glucose is the primary short-term energy molecule that your cells use. Now, your digestive system helps make that glucose from things like starches. Remember when you eat pasta, when you eat rice, when you eat potatoes, those are complex carbohydrates. Starches are really just chains of sugars linked together, but your digestive system, both the stomach and the small intestine, break those into simple sugars. And there's glucose. That's our primary one. Okay? There is our destination, ATP. So what's the jumping between those two, right? That's the big thing. Well, as we said, it's a complex set of reactions that converts organic components, compounds, into ATP. Now, this is not in your notes, but it's just a preview, and we're just going to kind of give you some visuals to go along with it. As we already said, the chemical reactants of cellular respiration are the same products that a photosynthetic plant makes. You breathe in O2, right? Comes in through your lungs, goes into your blood supply, and it circulates to every cell in your body. Every cell in your body needs oxygen in order to keep making ATP. So how do you get glucose into your mitochondria? Well, you might remember that glucose travels also in your blood, so it circulates to every cell. How does it get into your cell? Remember we talked about how there is facilitated diffusion. So now we're inside a cell, right? We're inside a bigger cell, and the glucose has diffused and gotten to the mitochondria. Well, in a multi-step process, we're going to break that sugar down, C6H12O6, into smaller molecules. And we've heard that large molecules store energy, and these are small molecules, so all the energy has been harvested. Let's keep kind of scrolling along here. And let's see. Here we go. So, as mentioned in our preview, photosynthesis and cellular respiration are opposite processes from a chemical standpoint. From a standpoint of energy flow, let's examine that in a little more detail. We've heard that all of the energy for living organisms is the sun. Now, light for a plant can also come from like a lamp or a artificial source, but most plants use sunlight, and that's the source of all the energy. So what's happening in here is we're storing the energy, right? It's a process by which the sunlight is being turned into chemical energy. Now, who uses glucose? Every organism alive, not just animals, not just the heterotrophs. Plants use their own glucose, and then maybe you also eat parts of the plant and you take some of it for yourself, right? That's what a heterotroph does. That's what a consumer does. Glucose then, with all of its stored energy, releases it into a very small energy molecule, ATP. Remember the triphosphate, and that triphosphate is kind of like our everyday unit of energy. Let's keep moving along. And what else is kind of important about this, right? There's two kinds of cellular respiration. The first kind that's the most common is aerobic respiration. If there is plenty of oxygen available, which is under most conditions, you breathe it in, you walk around, you do everyday events, and that's the most efficient way to make ATP, when there's oxygen present. On the other hand, there's another type of respiration that your body can do when there isn't enough oxygen. What if we run out of oxygen? And you're like, what do you mean, like can't breathe? Nope. What we're referring to is during extreme exercise. You're still breathing, but there's not enough O2 getting to your cells. Basically, to get the oxygen from your lungs to your muscles in your leg, it takes a little while. And if you start sprinting, the rate that the oxygen gets to your muscle cells is not fast enough, and your cells start running out of oxygen. And your body can turn on something that's called anaerobic. The prefix an means not. Aerobic means using oxygen. In biology, it means using oxygen to make energy. So an means not using O2. Okay? And that's the big overview. Now, are there subtypes of anaerobic respiration? Sure. We do something called lactic acid fermentation or lactic acid production. If your muscles stay in an anaerobic zone or activation for long enough, you're going to feel your muscles get very tired. They feel heavy. especially after doing some sports or doing some exercise or dance. And that's lactic acid building up in your muscles. Now, that's how our bodies go into anaerobic respiration. Many other species do something called alcohol fermentation. And fermentation, you're thinking, wait a minute, are we making like wine or beer or other alcohols like that? Well, quite honestly, that's how humans have learned to harness this. But organisms like yeast are famous. That's another organism. It's a single-celled eukaryote, and they don't do lactic acid formation. They don't have the genes for it. Nor do we in our body have the genes to do alcohol fermentation. So what's the byproducts of this? They make much less energy, and in the case of yeast, they can make some alcohol. And humans have learned to make beverages out of it. And before you think, oh, it's just for adults have wine or beer or other alcohols for enjoyment or for meals. Remember, in the history of humans, alcohol was considered much safer to drink when we didn't have safe water. But that's like a really old history lesson. Why did they drink more alcohol during the 1600s? Well, it was because the water supply wasn't safe. Now, here's the meat of it. Here's the part that I need you to kind of dig into. So, cellular respiration. Let's go to the very top. We'll use a combination of the laser pointer right up here. What is cellular respiration? Well, I hope you've already heard some of the main ideas, but let's put them into writing. Cellular respiration is the process by which all organisms, plants, animals, fungus, even bacteria, break down what? They break down glucose. To quickly, it's a quick process, to form a chemical energy in the form of, you guys know this, adenosine triphosphate. So is glucose the only energy molecule? Nope. It's the molecule that's a small, quick energy source, but we need to turn it into something even smaller. Okay, now let's go into the exact reaction. I hope you remember this. C6H12O6 combined with oxygen. We're going to have to know about aerobic respiration mostly. You produce CO2 and you produce water. Now, I'll be honest, I know why that little extra box is there. It's not meant to be confusing, but what really is there is that the major other product, even though it comes from ADP, is that the other product that's of note, right, is high energy ATP. So I'm putting a little star around it. You can decorate it how you want to show that it's storing the energy, okay, or it's energy available. What are the similarities and differences between photosynthesis and respiration? Well, the major similarity is that they use the same compounds, the same chemicals and elements are involved. It's the same compounds in both. But the process, what's the difference, is that they are opposite reactions. What we mean by that is the products of one reactant, the products of photosynthesis, become or change into the reactants of the cellular respiration. That says reactants. I'm using a different stylus, and it's a little hard to do small details, okay? The next part, the process of cellular respiration begins when blank from digested blank passes through the cell membrane. Oh, we've already heard about that. Cellular respiration begins when glucose from digested food, you could say starches, but we'll go with food, pass through the cell membrane into the cytoplasm of a cell. How does the glucose go in? Facilitated diffusion. Now the glucose is broken down here, okay? If oxygen is present or available, then the two molecules will combine in the mitochondria. So there's a little typo here. The two molecules go into Oops, let's write it carefully. They go into the mitochondria. Now, the exact chemical reaction is kind of the domain of someone who studies more biology in high school or in college. But the key thing is that electrons are part of every atom. And in this process, enzymes remove electrons from the glucose, and those are high energy electrons, and they basically convert adenosine diphosphate. Remember, that means two phosphates. They then put that phosphate back on, and you make a triphosphate. And that is one of the most important take-home messages of cellular respiration. The carbon, the hydrogen, and the oxygen have now been broken apart from the glucose, right? They're all separate from each other. And the cell, with other enzymes, combines them back into CO2 and water. And those are waste products. You breathe out the CO2, and it diffuses out of your cells, it goes back into your blood, and it eventually gets to your lungs. Because the oxygen was one of the starting materials, we of course call that aerobic. So I bet maybe you've heard of the old-fashioned exercise called aerobics, which is when you moved your whole body. There was kind of funky music. It was a big 80s thing. Of course, maybe newer workouts and exercise are called new things, but aerobic respiration is the scientific name for using oxygen, okay? So how much ATP do you get? Well, we're going to put in, for when you do aerobic respiration, you get 36 ATP. That's the net result. You actually make a little more than that, and then you have to use a little bit of that, but 36 ATP is the net result. That's a lot of ATP from one glucose molecule. So talk about getting some energy to do some work at the cellular level. Okay, let's go to the last part. What if oxygen is not available? And we've already had a preview of this. It's referred to as anaerobic because an means not. The prefix an, aerobic means not aerobic. So the glucose is not broken down completely, and there's only a little bit of ATP made, right? And this reaction is called fermentation. F-E-R-M-E-N-T, ferment, A-T-I-O-N. Fermentation. And there's actually two types. There's, there's alcohol fermentation, and it occurs in cells, specifically an organism called yeast cells. And it makes, alcohol and CO2 as waste. And you think to yourself, okay, so that's maybe why beer has bubbles in it, because it makes alcohol and CO2. The CO2 are the bubbles. And you think to yourself, but I know a little bit about making bread too. A lot of people have been making bread during the quarantines and during COVID, homemade bread. And some of you have heard that yeast is one of the ingredients in homemade bread, and that's true. So why does bread not have alcohol in it? Well, during the cooking of the bread, the alcohol evaporates, but the bread gets all of the nice fluffy holes in it because the CO2 that was released by the yeast cells makes the bread rise. So you probably can relate to that. You've heard of a couple of different products, breads and alcoholic beverages. Okay. The other kind of fermentation is called lactic acid fermentation, and it occurs in other organisms. We're going to say it happens in humans. I would imagine, though, it happens in other mammals, like a racehorse or a dog that has to do a lot of running, maybe for fun or for play or for work. The lactic acid is the waste product. You also breathe out CO2, but the lactic acid triggers some reactions in your body that basically make you sore. You can get rid of that lactic acid by stretching and by lighter movements, and your body can break down that lactic acid. But if you ask someone to sprint, 10 or 12 or 15 times up and down a soccer field, they're gonna be a little tired, and I don't just mean tired, their muscles are going to be sore. Now, that's not the same as what happens the day after. That's muscles repairing themselves. I mean, they feel heavy. You almost can barely lift them because you've done so much lactic acid fermentation, okay? So now the exact amount of ATP you make, you do not need to know, but you need to know that it is less. If you want to look up how much it is, it's in chapter 9, but it's much less than 36, okay? So that's a mistake. Let's kind of zoom in one last time. Oops. To here. And let's see if everything moves together. Uh-oh, something weird's happening. So the summary at the bottom, it's kind of important, and I'm having trouble getting to it. Maybe I can move the whole document like this. Uh-oh. Okay. Something weird happened. It does mean that I'm going to have to, erase some things. Just bear with me. I guess I'm not an expert at explain everything. I wanted the words to move with the page. So let's go to this summary that's at the very bottom, and now you'll be able to see it. And we'll even change color to make it a little stand out. Okay, let's go blue. Cellular respiration occurs in what organisms? All. The energy comes from glucose. If oxygen is present, ATP can efficiently be produced through aerobic respiration. If oxygen is not present, cells produce less ATP through fermentation or anaerobic. We're going to use the word anaerobic because then it matches up. Anaerob. I see, anaerobic respiration. You could put in the word fermentation there. So kind of an introduction. This is another video that
But it went over staffing and transportation. Almost everyone that's remote.
Processing bacteria, animals, and plants. In both the autotrophs and the heterotrophic cells use oxygen rich in your food and the ATP. The cells need energy to move and do things, so they use the food you eat to make ATP. The chemical the cells use for energy, respiration, that's aerobic, using oxygen that you breathe. Four stages that we'll introduce and discuss in depth. First stage cells break down glucose through glycolysis. Next, pyruvate oxidation, then citric acid cycle with oxidative phosphorylation. In your body, cells turn food to energy. Glucose from the food you eat, oxygen you breathe in, ATP energy. Release carbon dioxide when you breathe, creates water when complete. Three products total with ATP energy. C6 is 1206 plus 6O2 forms into 6CO2 plus 6H2O plus energy has ATP. First at glycolysis in the cytoplasm. Glucose is sugar that's made of 6 carbons converted to 2 molecules of pyruvate. ATP is made, NAD plus converted to NADH. Pyruvate in the mitochondrial matrix into a molecule of 2 carbons converted. Through an enzyme to make acetyl-CoA that replaces CO2 and NADH is made. Citric acid cycle acid with CoA that we just make a powerful carbon molecule creates a regenerated full carbon molecule. It causes the release of CO2 while we produce a new ATP and NADH2 and NADH. Alright, now what are those two?
Lori, Courtney didn't want it to go. She literally told her door and she said yes.
Put electrons in the electron transport train.
But you can go.
Turn back to empty forms, NAD plus and FAD and
So Banana's exam is done.
pumped out using energy released. How about the last stage? What is it? Protons bumped back into the matrix in this last stage. A process through an enzyme called ATP.
We're doing it online, right?
The oxygen takes electrons and protons and then
So it'll have
pumps
to get
into
typed in.
H2O
No.
molecule.
Oh, Kevin,
In your body, cells turn to energy. Glucose from the food you eat, oxygen you breathe in, ATP energy. Release carbon dioxide when you breathe, creates water when complete. Three products total with ATP ATP and the T. 6 is carbon, 6 plus 6 O2 forms into 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O plus energy as ATP. Go!
The still, just one, well, a comment. The still update, we've had issues with the still this year somehow. I just wanted to poll, does anyone
like you to take a look at. It's a little bit more fun, so to speak. It's a little bit more upbeat. It's from a YouTube channel called Jam Campus. It's about 3 minutes, and it's actually an incredibly detailed introduction to photosynthesis. It looks like this. Again, it's kind of a like pop-sounding song, but believe it or not, they actually show you the exact individual processes. Do you have to know this level of detail? No. But if this inspires you to learn more about the chemical reactions and how amazing the mitochondria are, you can watch all of this.